I'd be interested to hear your take on the Saudi nuclear deal.
Oh my God.
I'm
Yes. I would definitely like to talk about
I'm
that.
sure you have
That's
a lot of thoughts on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
absolutely. Thank you so much for accepting to come over again. It's a privilege to have you. Um, People said that they felt like they were at Georgetown University and they felt like they were getting an actual education out of it, which is exactly what we want out of this.
Absolutely.
I'm a strong believer that phobias come from ignorance, and as long as we don't answer the silly stupid questions that people think that it's stupid and silly, someone else is going to fill it up with their own answers and misinformation, and it's just going to create more misinformation, and it's going to make the Middle East even a more complicated place. So I really appreciate you taking this time and making this education part of your uh, agenda.
Sure. I
Um,
mean, I'll just say to that, Wajeeh, that my experience, particularly coming from the classroom, is that I mean, I know it's a cliche, but there are no stupid questions, right? And,
exactly.
if somebody raises their hand and they have a stupid question, it's usually a question that a lot of other people have as well, but maybe don't feel comfortable asking. And it's, those kinds of questions that kind of, you know, it sometimes really get back to basics that can be super important.
And I'm typically the kid in front of the class that's asking all those stupid questions.
Important. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I get out of the class and my friends come to me, thank you so much for asking that question. I was
Right.
also thinking about it.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Um, like, just for, I'm just genuinely interested. You've studied the Middle East extensively. What originally drew you to the Middle East?
Oh dear. Okay. So here's my story in sort of a nutshell. Um, so I grew up in, what I would say for an American are, kind of unusual circumstances in that I was born in the Philly suburbs, and my grandparents were immigrants to the United States, as was my mother. Um, and their circumstance was that my grandparents survived the Holocaust. They were Polish Jews. They survived the Holocaust. My grandfather's family, for example, he was the only one who survived from his family. Um, my mother was born in 1946. So right afterward, she was born after the Holocaust. And my grandparents, who, as I mentioned, were Polish Jews, had gone to Germany because it was US occupied at that point. So it was a safe place to go, ironically enough. And they lived in a refugee camp, which was then they called them DP camps, and it was a displaced persons camp. And they came to the United States in 1949. And so I grew up with, two grandparents who had, heavy Polish accents. My grandmother maintained she didn't have an accent, who had gone through a tremendous amount of trauma. And my mother too, and it was different for her, of course, but she came to the US when she was 3 years old. They were immigrants who came with nothing. Um, and as a kid, I mean, all of that, of course, had an impact on me. And I would say that the main impact that it had on me when I was a kid. So sorry, I'm giving you like the whole, but the main impact that it had on me as a kid, and this is the part I think that's very different to, what a lot of Americans experience, is that I had this sense that what happened in the world was important and that, conflict, war. had a profound impact on regular people in the way that it had on my family, which again, I think is something that for a lot of Americans, we're just isolated from and don't, I mean, stuff that happens overseas is somebody else's problem. Um, and I always had this kind of connection and this really burning interest in understanding what was happening in other parts of the world. And so that grew into just as I got older, general interest in world affairs, current events, all of that. But then part of it was for me as a Jewish American and as someone who was, um, I was raised to think of having, particularly with the experience of grandparents who had survived the Holocaust, was raised to think of Israel as the security blanket, right? The idea that, anywhere in the world, things could go south and, the Jews would be the first on the chopping block, the first victims, and we needed somewhere that was safe and secure for us to
Mhm.
go if need be. And so that prompted, and I was interested in Israel, interested in learning more about it. And as I did that, it became a broader interest in learning about the region, right? So that's kind of how it grew. And I started when I was in college. Had an opportunity to take some great classes on the Middle East. One of my favorites was a class that I took my junior year in college with a phenomenal professor that was called The Struggle for Palestine slash Israel. And it was really a process for me. And then, going to grad school, I learned more and traveled throughout the Middle East and, doing my dissertation research and all of that I had an opportunity to do a postdoc in Qatar and learn much more about the Gulf, which was fascinating. So it's been kind of a process. I mean, I would say that was sort of my entree point, but it's been a process of learning gradually more about the region. I studied, I mean, I guess a key piece of that would be I studied Arabic, and I'm a lover of foreign languages. I've always been, I just love foreign languages, and it's a wonderful way to learn other cultures, right? And so it's been a real process, and part of that process was learning that some of the kind of foundational myths that I was raised with are a lot more complicated, especially vis-a-vis Israel Palestine. Um, and so it's just, it's been a journey. It's been a pleasure to learn and also have an opportunity to teach students and learn alongside them and see what, we were just talking about what questions they have and delving into those. And so that's a really long, it's probably a longer answer to your question than you wanted, Wajid, but
I
that,
actually don't mind the details. It's actually very enlightening to. I like to understand the person I'm talking to because it actually brings out more information that I could ask, like for me to ask you
sure,
about.
of course.
So like you've obviously Mm, did you tr I from my research, you've been to Bahrain, Egypt, Qatar, Syria, Israel, and several other more countries. You speak Arabic and you speak Hebrew.
Yes.
Uh, and you have also been spending a lot of time studying the region and explaining it to Americans and trying to understand how Americans look at the region.
Mm,
My my big like I have my own views about what Americans have misconceptions about the Middle East,
sure.
but what do you think is like the main misconception that Americans in general have about the day-to-day lives that people in the Middle East live, or like how the Middle East operates?
I mean, Look, I would start with this. Sorry, fellow Americans, but I think that a key part of that is that Americans, for the most part, don't really think about people in other parts of the world, whether it's the Middle East or Africa or Asia, Europe, whatever. I mean, I Americans tend to be, we're isolated here, relatively speaking, by two oceans. We tend to be, I mean, if you look at what Americans think about when we go to the polls, it's very much wrapped up in what's happening in our own country and especially what's happening vis-a-vis our pocketbooks. Um, I think that's part one. I mean, I think and it's not just confined to the Middle East, right? I think Americans are very I mean, look at my goodness, look at, what kids learn in schools, when it comes to history and social studies and, I mean, of course it's important to learn about what happens here, but I think, we really don't teach our kids nearly enough about the rest of the world. So that's part one. But I think to the extent that Americans do think about the Middle East, they think about violence.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, we've part of it is Islamophobia for sure. There's a heavy dose of that. And obviously, think like 9/11 obviously did not help. And, Americans don't tend to, I mean, not that there's any excuse for something like that, but Americans tend not to really think about context. And, so there's a lot of prejudice. I think, I mean, I see it, I obviously, you know, focus on what's happening in the Middle East, but I'm also very interested in US politics around Israel, Palestine, and Middle East. And I watch that pretty carefully. And I'm really interested in, we have um, some prominent Muslim politicians coming up in the United States.
Mhm.
And, whether it's Zoran Mamdani mayor of New York City, who's, incredibly gifted politician
Yep.
and gotten
Married to a Syrian woman.
married to a Syrian woman. That's right. Syrian American. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Um, And, whether it's Zoran Mamdani or, the other person I'm looking at very intensely these days
Cool.
is Abdul El Sayed in Michigan. And, it seems to me that the some of the reactions that you see to those folks and expectations about how they will speak about particular issues, especially Israel Palestine, does reflect to me at least some degree of Islamophobia. And that's something that I think, I mean, that's something I think is really important for us to work on. I mean, I personally, and I've been, open about this on subs. I interviewed Abdul Al Sayed recently on the debrief, which was an amazing opportunity to speak with him. Um, and I think it's really. I mean, I'm a believer
That
in
was great.
I'm thank you. I'm a believer in representation, right? I mean, I think America is a better country when all of the communities that are part of, that are what makes America great, folks who have immigrated from all over the world, when they're represented, when our Congress doesn't, just largely reflect white Christian and mostly men. And I think I also am a believer that Jewish Muslim solidarity is incredibly important. And I think it's, particularly
Yes.
vis-a-vis Israel Palestine, there are going to be tensions there. And I think it's really important that we face those tensions. We have dialogue. And, so it's been a pleasure to kind of do some of that through my work on the debrief. And I've meandered quite a bit from your original question, but
No, you're taking me right into my next question. Actually, that's a perfect segue. I was going to ask you. You spent years organizing and advocating for diplomatic solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians. If I'm understanding correctly, you an advocate of a two-state solution?
it's a great question. So let me answer it this way. Um,
Okay.
when I um, when I left academia I was kind of typical tenure track position in academia, and I decided to change gears and go into policy work. Moved up here to the DC area, and I worked for two progressive Jewish organizations. The first one was Americans for Peace Now, which now is a different name, but it's the sister or it was is the sister organization of the Israeli peace movement Shalom Achshav, which means peace now. Um, so I worked for them, and then I worked for J Street, bigger organization, more people will know it. But both of these organizations are associated with a two-state solution. Um, Here's my position as an American citizen whose leverage is vis-a-vis my own government, right? The American government. Ultimately, I think it is for Palestinians and Israelis to figure out exactly what a just, equal, peaceful, secure um, solution for the two peoples between the river and the sea is going to be. But my impact is vis-a-vis the policies, the extremely consequential policies that
Mhm.
the American government adopts. And I think that, sometimes under the mantra of, or security blanket of two-state solution, the United States government has adopted policies that have been very unproductive. And that's sometimes an understatement. And so, what I think our North Star should be as Americans, it's like, if you're an American, I don't particularly care whether you're a two-stater, a one-stater, and I also have some humility about all or a confederationist or, I have some humility about that. What I care about is first and foremost to make sure that my government is adopting policies that are conducive toward things like ending the occupation, which is something that we are incredibly far from right now.
What
It's
does it
we're
mean?
yeah.
This is a what does it mean to say let's end the occupation, and what does it look like when we say let's end the occupation and Israel, or you want to call it Palestine? I don't care what you want to call it at this point. Like what's going on? Everyone can agree that there's some sort of occupation, there's some sort of injustice happening. But what does it look like?
Well, first of all, not everyone agrees. Uh,
That's right.
Many people agree, sure, including many Jews, but not everyone, right? There are still
You're absolutely correct.
I mean, and I can say this as someone who has, lobbied for years on Capitol Hill. And anytime, for example, we would try to get support for a letter or piece of legislation that included the word occupation, you immediately narrowed the field of politicians who would even consider signing on to such a letter.
Wow.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, the word occupation was very controversial, very much a tree. You could get some members to sign on, but let's say, that would probably limit you to a ceiling of maybe 60 members who would sign on, which is very small. I'm talking if you're talking about the House of Representatives where you have
It's like
430.
very small.
Yeah, it's a right.
Yeah.
It's a very small. Now, that's changed. right? I mean, American politics have changed tremendously in a short time. So what I'm talking about is, I left, my position doing that kind of work a year and a half ago. Things have changed since then. The number would go up, from 60, but it's still not even it's only Democrats, first of all, who would consider signing on to something like that. And it's a subset of Democrats, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to make clear, it's not even universally accepted that there is something called an occupation. So what I mean by that um, would be focused on the West Bank and Gaza, first of all, and we can talk about Israel proper, Israel and its sort of recognized boundaries, known as the Green Line. But as
Yes.
far as Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, we are talking about an end to the settlements, which continue to proliferate, and, the situation in the West Bank in particular is getting worse and worse. You have settler violence on steroids, but it's very important to note that it is state backed settler violence that goes hand in hand with the increase in settlements, the increase in unauthorized outposts, which then in many cases are subsequently retroactively authorized. Um, all of that needs to stop. Then, of course, you have the situation in Gaza, where Israel occupies roughly 70% of the territory. A very small territory in which Palestinians who managed to survive the war are shoved into, a very small minority of the territory there. And so and we know, that over the past 2+ years, almost 3 years now, since October 7th, 2023, the horrific Hamas attacks, and then Israel's, beyond retaliation for all of that, that U.S. weapons played an absolutely indispensable role in all of that. We know that the
Yeah.
killing in Gaza has not stopped. So, all of that, all of that needs to end. There needs to be accountability for it. I am a real believer in international law. And some of that goes back to my own background, which I brought up as the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and believing that, international institutions, international law, things like the Genocide Convention of 1948, are things that are foundational to a world that is not governed by the law of the jungle, and in which there are standards, there are laws, there is oversight, there is at least the potential for accountability that can help to keep us all safe. And so I think, and then you can talk about, so I focused on the West Bank and Gaza. Then there's the issue of Israel itself within the Green Line. And as far as that's concerned, you have a majority population of about 80% Jews, roughly 20% are Palestinian citizens of Israel. The situation for Palestinians in Israel is much better than for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. But nonetheless, it is not a situation of equality and justice and equal rights for everyone. And I think that is something as well that the United States government should be helping to foster, as well as, um, pushing for the Israeli government, currently led by Benjamin Netanyahu, to stop its attacks on fundamental pillars of democracy like the judiciary. Um, but of course, that's hard to imagine when you have a government like ours here in Washington, which is attacking our own democracy. But those are all components of a policy that I think we as Americans ought to be pushing for.
Let me ask you yes or no questions, and then I'll let you explain.
Okay,
Does ending the occupation means open borders between Israel and Palestine?
it could. There are different models and visions for what that might look like. So, for example, there is a movement, there's a group in Israel Palestine called A Land for All, which, if you know, for folks who have followed the debrief, I've had a few different programs on Confederation and this specific movement called A Land for All. And their vision, which is a two-state vision, which I think is very interesting, and it's gotten a lot of high-profile attention. The heads of A Land for All were just, for example, on Ezra Klein's podcast. They get a lot of attention internationally. um, what they ultimately envision is a two-state solution where you would have state of Israel, state of Palestine. You would have citizenship for each group of people within, Israelis within Israel, Palestinians within Palestine. But ultimately, and they don't envision this immediately, but ultimately, they envision a process by which borders become permeable, and people, you have a situation where Israelis would be able to live in Palestine and vice versa. Palestinians would be able to live in Israel, including Palestinian refugees, by the way, which addresses the question of the right of return, which has been a sticking point in previous negotiations between Israelis and
You
Palestinians.
mean Palestinian refugees living abroad?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, right. And that's a good, I mean, that's a good point, because there are, of course, Palestinian refugees who live in the West Bank and Gaza, but also Palestinian refugees who live in other states in the Middle East, especially Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. Those are all places in which UNRWA operates. But also, of course, there are Palestinian refugees in Europe and the United States, etc. And one of the sticking points in negotiations over the years since the 1990s between Israelis and Palestinians was always the question of Palestinian refugees. That was, there are other key sticking points like the status of Jerusalem and settlements, and what you just asked me about borders, right? Those have all been, very thorny issues that have not been solved. But I think there are.
Or the settlements? Like how?
That's what I
Like that's. Oh, sorry, sorry, sorry.
No, no, absolutely. Settlements is absolutely one of the key sticking points. 100%. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at, um, settlement growth, I mean, settlements started after Israel, in the 1967 war, conquered the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, as well as additional territory, the Golan Heights, Sinai. What am I forgetting? Yeah. Um, I think I've got it. But anyway, so it started, right? Settlements started after 1967, but the really pernicious reality is that they increased also substantially during the Oslo years, during the 1990s. Even while, Israelis and Palestinians, even when Israel was governed by labor, more left wing governments, the settlements still continued. They still increased. And it's left us with and when I say us, I mean, I fundamentally believe, as someone who, cares about Palestinians and cares about Israelis. I mean, this is, the problem of the settlements has been terrible for Israel as well, and created a terrible situation, which even I mean, there was an extraordinary letter just this past week, although it's not a first, but I think it's important, and it's maybe something that viewers here won't have heard about. There's a group called Commanders for Israel's Security. At this point, I think there's something like 600 high level former Israeli officers who served in the IDF, in the Mossad, in the Shin Bet, right? So the, high level security folks who wrote a letter to President Trump which said, the problem of settler violence is getting worse. Is metastasizing, and it is not only horrific for the Palestinians, but it's terrible for Israel's security. It's terrible for the future. And, Mr. Trump, you're the only one, we have this completely irresponsible right-wing government. And Mr. Trump, you're the only one who can do something to influence this. And so, yeah, the settlements are a huge, huge problem.
Uh,
And there are different thoughts about how to deal with them in terms of any possible end to, this horrific situation that Israel Palestine is now in.
I'm sorry, how do they believe that Trump has more influence on Israel than Israelis over the Israeli government? Like, my next question was going to be, like, I've seen a lot of studies about the expansion of the settlements, whether it's neighboring countries or Palestine itself, but I haven't seen like much talk about what is the proposed solution. Like, are we kicking out the settlers that are in the settlements? And if we are, which date and which border are we gonna go back to? And if that's so, then do you just hand the keys over, or and the people who are still forcing themselves over with weapons because Israel allows carry on, like concealed carry or even automatic weapon. I see a lot of settlers straight up with automatic weapons, and they're not even part of the military. Straight up approaching Palestinians and stuff. Sometimes
Some
they are.
are.
I don't know. Okay, like there's a lot of things. There's a lot of moving puzzles in regards to one thing. Not like and it's just settlements. We're not even getting into other stuff.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Um, okay, uh, so you're asking about what are the possible visions of what could happen vis-a-vis
What
the
are the
settlement?
hypothesis provided solutions, and what are the multiple solutions available for something
So
like this?
so one of the potential approaches that has been, there's been under consideration is the idea that um, you would have first of all land swaps. So, right, you have what's known as the green line, right?
Okay.
These are
Let
the
me see if I
arm
could find a picture of that.
yeah, yeah, that'd be great if you could show the green line. So the green line, this would be the armistice lines after the 1948 war, right? And before 67 and Israel occupied this additional territory, the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, right? Um, so, one key idea is that the Green Line would form a basis for a border. But then, because of the settlements, right, you would have some percentage of land that would be swapped between a new Israeli state and a Palestinian state. And the idea here, I'm sure you could, you could probably find maps for this, but the idea is that a sizable percentage of the settlements are along the Green Line, right? They're over the Green
Mhm.
Line in the West Bank, right? But they're relatively close to the Green Line. And so you could kind of like, redraw a borderline from the Green Line to, basically annex these major settlement blocks to Israel and then give the Palestinian state reciprocally some territory that currently belongs to Israel, for example, in the Negev. Um, okay, so it's hard. Yeah. Does that actually?
This is the green line you're talking
There
about,
we go.
right?
There we go. Yeah. And so one thing that's important to, to recognize that your viewers can see in that third map there. And actually, what we could talk about. So let's talk about these maps. The map on the left, I assume, is probably what, mandatory Palestine?
I
What is it?
believe so. The 1946.
Exactly. Exactly. So the map on the left is what Palestine looked like when it was at the end of the British mandate, right? The British gave up their mandate after World War II in 1947. So we're looking there at the map all the way on the left is what the British mandate of Palestine looked like. The second to the left, right,
The
is the UN
UN
part,
petition.
right? The second map to the left is the UN partition plan, I assume?
Uh-huh. That's right.
Okay. Right.
1947.
Exactly. Okay. So in 1947, after the British said we got to get the hell out of here, we're handing this problem over to the UN. The UN passed the new nascent UN that was established after World War II. One of the first things that it did was to tackle this problem of Palestine. Right at that point, it was Palestine, mandatory Palestine, and to say, we're going to deal with this problem by partitioning it into an Arab state, which you see there on the second map to the left is in green, right? That's Palestine in green, according to the UN partition plan. And the pieces in white would be the Jewish state.
Israel.
Right.
Yes.
And so what you can see is that, right, each of those states were, not exactly contiguous. Each of them have three pieces that kind of
Mm.
touch at a particular point, right? Um, at that point, I don't remember the relative percentages. The Jewish state is still a little bit, as envisioned by the UN partition plan, is a little bit larger than the Arab state, but it's, fairly close to parity, right? And then the third map to the left, I hope this isn't like way weedsy for folks, and I'm sure some folks know this already, but maybe, for folks who don't, the third map to the left is what the situation.
1949 to 1967.
Exact. So the third map to the left is what the situation looked like after the 1948 war, right? Which Israelis refer to as the War of Independence, right? And the Palestinians, of course, refer to as the Nakba. Now, you can see why the Palestinians would refer to it as the Nakba, because you went from a situation after the UN partition plan, where you have almost sort of equal situation between Jews and Arabs, not exactly, but then after the 1948 war, obviously, what would become the state of Israel conquered additional territory, such that now, Israel within the green line, which is, I'm still looking at the map. I'm still looking at the map that's the third from the left, right? Israel within the green line, which is all of the white, is 78% of mandatory Palestine, and the green is only 22%.
Wow.
So the situation for the Palestinians, in mandatory Palestine got substantially worse, not to mention the fact that roughly 750,000 Palestinians left, became refugees as a result of the 48 war, the Nakba in 1948, right? So that is what the sort of green line situation looks like. And then what you see all the way over on the right, I can't see what year it's.
2014.
Okay, 2014. So that's 12 years ago. So that reflects what the situation actually looked like on the ground in 2014 vis-a-vis settlement growth, right, in the West Bank. And I can assure you that in the subsequent 12 years between 2014 and 26, the situation has only gotten much worse, especially over the last almost 4 years under the Netanyahu government, in which, de facto annexation has proceeded, on steroids, particularly under the leadership of Bezalel Smotrich, who basically is serving as the de facto Israeli governor of the West Bank. So that's kind of I think it's really helpful to have a look at the maps. I hope folks found that
Well,
beneficial.
they did. A lot of people said they appreciated the maps
Good,
because
good.
it does explain a lot. Picture says 1,000 words, like people say. Um, this yeah, I could easily say I have not, in my all of my life watching the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In modern history at the moment, I haven't seen the situation globally polarized as it is today
Absolutely.
when it comes to Israel. Alliances are quickly shifting.
Mhm.
During the Trump administration, Jared Kushner spent a lot of time working on Abrahamic Accord. If I remember correctly, they got Bahrain, UAE, Sudan,
Kind of.
kind of.
Kind of.
Okay.
And Morocco. Morocco's the other.
Morocco, Somaliland, not Somalia.
That's more recent, but yes, I mean, yes. Yes.
Uh, these are the countries the and in fact that has put the Gulf states in the Bahrain and in particular the United Arab Emirates in direct fire with their neighboring countries because the crown prince himself told Western media, Crown Prince Mohammed Bonsa, where he told the Western media that the reason I'm not going with the Abrahamic Accord is I fear for my life. He fears for his life, and he said that publicly to Western media.
Mm.
And when you are afraid from your own people, that is different. Mm, I don't know if you've heard reports before that the crown prince have hired Blackwater in his own private quarters when he doesn't want the Saudi National Guards there because the
Mm.
National Guards are loyal to tribes, and
Mhm.
sometimes he doesn't trust the tribes, and tribal trust in him is going down. So it makes sense. So anything pro-Israel at the moment can risk the crown prince's life. And all attempts, most of the attempts I've seen in Saudi Arabia on royal family members happen from within the family or from members close to the family,
Yeah.
including the assassination of King Faisal.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So this is not. This is when I say it's polarized. I mean, it's polarizing.
Yeah.
But Israel is not really a good friend, is it? It's not being a good friend to the United Arab Emirates when, like, United Arab Emirates supposed to have a secret meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, and that secret meeting, every is not secret.
Yeah. I mean, so look, I think the Emiratis, uh, which is to say the ruling regime,
Hmm.
seem to be, have look, they've further dug in to their relationship with Israel in the 6 years since they signed the so-called Abraham Accords in 2020 at the end of Donald Trump's presidency. And they've done so despite the fact that, they really emphasized in 2020, they took credit for the condition that they had put on their signing the Abraham Accords, which was supposedly that Israel would not annex the West Bank for at least, I think it was like 2 or 2.5 years, something like that. Which of course is BS because, right, Israel hasn't like formally declared an annexation, but obviously annexation is proceeding apace on the ground anyway. And the Emiratis are not using any leverage to do anything about it. But, the fact is, I think one thing that comes out, which is worth mentioning, and you know a lot more about this than I do, is the distinction that I'm sure folks in the United States don't appreciate between, for example, the 6 members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Within it, you have countries like UAE and Qatar, which have much smaller uh, populations who are actually citizens, who are, that's a small percentage
Footprint. Yeah.
of the overall number of residents because they have a huge number of expats who cannot become citizens, right?
Yeah.
With a very small number of citizens who are sharing a hell of a lot of oil and gas wealth, who are extremely wealthy, who have very close relations with the royal families and who are very well taken care of. And you don't have a question of like, restive populations that might turn against the regime. So in the UAE and Qatar, you have regimes that have a much freer hand to adopt the foreign policies that they might like to. I'm not saying that that they don't pay any attention, or, that there's absolutely anything that they could do without.
I was going to agree with you actually.
With
Um,
but I think I think the point that you're making is that Saudi Arabia is different, right? And of course, you know more about this than a lot more about this than I do. Saudi Arabia has a much larger population. Of citizens. It right? It
actually, Saudi Arabia is in some ways similar. What I can tell you is that it is different in the ratio,
Yes.
but they are all like so out of Saudi Arabia's population currently 35 million. 15 million out of that 35 million is definitely all expat.
Okay. But that's less than half.
That's less than half. But it's way larger than like a lot of other countries. Gulf states are what like I agree with you. I just think that in general, Gulf states are consuming, importing states, whether it is from services to education, all the way to products. And that includes a lot of that's why like as soon as the transactional relationship and the UAE became insecure. That's why when the transactional relationship for these Westerners, expats, especially ones that can afford to leave, right? They left because the relationship is strictly transaction.
Mm.
But the ones that are stuck there are the ones who are having a sponsor who can hold their paper,
Right.
ones who cannot legally fight back,
Yep.
ones who cannot afford to leave and pay to leave. So you have that situation going on. But you're absolutely correct. Saudi Arabia's population is much larger. Um, yeah,
And not as wealthy, right? It is not as well. I mean, it's,
yeah,
still better off
it,
than a lot of other countries in the world, but it's certainly not as wealthy as, the citizenry of UAE, Qatar, for example, right? And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that the Emirati regime had a much freer hand in terms of being able to conclude the Abraham Accords with Israel without, a domestic backlash. Bahrain has its own fascinating situation, uh, which is precarious in any case because you have, a majority Shia population
uh-huh.
with a minority Sunni government that is extensively supported from the outside by the Saudis, right? Who are basically a spot. I mean, it was fascinating. I had an opportunity in it would have been 2010. I had an
Right
opportunity
before the Arab Spring.
right before the Arab Spring. Right before the Arab Spring, I had an opportunity to visit Bahrain. And it was fascinating because you could feel the restive, the public discontent, especially if you went to the, majority Shia areas.
Wow.
And, you could see the influence of Iran, right? Strong, strong Iranian influence. Already I took lots of pictures of like anti regime graffiti, and that was in like September 2010, very shortly before the Arab Spring, of course, starts in Tunisia and it spreads to Egypt and then it spread to Bahrain. You had massive unrest in Bahrain, which the regime was able to put down with, of course, the help of the Saudis, right? And the Emiratis
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Um,
No, the Saudis sent maybe tens of thousands of troops, and they used live ammunition
yeah.
to gun down protesters. And the protesters that gathered at a roundabout that was famous for,
The
that
Pearl
became
Round,
famous. Yes, they demolished the whole. They demolished the whole thing.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so there would so it wouldn't become a symbol.
yep, yep, yep,
And so yeah, the Bahrain, the Saudis like to call Bahrain our little sister, and they also like to call the UAE our little sister, and that really bothers the UAE because they're like, we're not little sister.
yeah, right. Right, and the
When
UAE, obviously, the UAE has really been, crafting its own path, and there's a lot. I think we talked about this last time, quite a lot of contention and conflict between the Emiratis and the Saudis, and you see that, the way that it's played out in Yemen and Sudan and, and vis-a-vis Israel as well. But I think getting back to the original point here, about Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the potential for the Saudis to join the Abraham Accords. And that brings us to the Saudi nuclear deal, which we could also talk about, right? Uh, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has, a lot of power, but it's not, I mean, he is still constrained. He does still have to worry about a major backlash because of tremendous anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian sentiment that has increased, of course, since October 7th. And so, and that does, I think, impact just this last week announcement of a U.S. Saudi nuclear deal.
I am looking up one fact real quick to he was ambassador to the United States from 2000, from 1983. So, the Saudi government have been trying to get their hands on nuclear technology from the United States since 1983. Since Prince Bandar bin Sultan was the ambassador to the United States. They wanted a nuclear weapon. They lobbied all the states. They moved billions of dollars to whatever bank each state's demanded. So the tactic is like basically, which bank do you have in your state needs funding that the state reserve is not going to put in there, and the Saudis would put that money in there for them. Uh,
So can I just ask you, let me ask you this. If the Saudis were already as long ago as 1983 trying to lay the groundwork for acquiring nuclear technology and, nuclear enrichment, Was that because, in your read, is that because of the Iranian Revolution in '79 and this feeling of an increased threat from the Iranians, or is there another reason for it?
Regional dominance. They want to become in fact, it's really part of their propaganda. Saudi Arabia wants to say the solution is in Riyadh. For whatever problem it comes to the Middle East, they want to say the solution is in Riyadh. They wanted to have a deterrence power against Israel at one point in that back in the day, even though they had backdoor relationships, but it wasn't as deep as backdoor relationships are now. The Saudis are actively purchasing technology, weapons, and access to cyber warfare uh, through the Israelis on a regular basis. The plane that the Qatari family flies on, the plane that the Saudi government flies on, both have technologies that are from like they bought from the Israeli government to like defend the plane.
Mhm.
It's like it's not a secret anymore. These are just facts. But back then, Saudi Arabia wanted to have a deterrence against Iran. They also wanted to have a deterrence against Israel, and they wanted the regional dominance. But the real answer always came to from the United States as no, thank you, thank you, but no, thank you.
Sure.
We appreciate your business, but this is a type of technology we've learned from our mistake with Iran.
Yep.
We gave them a nuclear plant, and that technology went forward. Even though I know plenty of Saudi students that came to the United States, in particular, to learn about nuclear physics and nuclear laser physics and nuclear engineering. I've met many of those Saudi students that were returning back to look into starting some sort of nuclear facility. So the Saudi government was sending students abroad to learn that technology, but they have never laid the groundwork. And they just found the perfect president that would allow them to do so. Now, the US president in the past demanded that the Saudis sign on the Abrahamic Accord, but this time he didn't come up with that idea that the Saudis need to sign on the Abrahamic Accord, and not until the Saudis and the Americans have already signed the agreement. So, like the Saudis and the Americans sat down and signed the nuclear agreement, and then a day or two after that, Trump goes, "Oh, wait a minute, hold on. I forgot. Can I change the rules real quick? You gotta agree on the Abrahamic Accord." So, like, I generally don't know if this deal is gonna even go forward or not, or if it's gonna fall apart
Yeah.
because I don't know if it have to go get approved by Congress?
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so there's another hurdle right there. And then is Trump gonna go back on is where are we on whether the Abrahamic Accord is on the table or not? Because if it is on the table, then the Saudis are probably gonna have to back out.
Here's my take. I mean, we'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah,
My take is, Trump got criticism after the deal was announced. He was criticized because the Biden administration was negotiating a nuclear deal with the Saudis before October 7th,
that's right.
2023. It was there was a situation where, it seemed like things were pretty close. We're pretty close to a situation where the Saudis might have agreed to normalize with Israel with only probably a pretty skimpy window dressing as far as any pathway to Palestinian statehood would go. But again, this is before October 7th. This is before the destruction of Gaza, right?
Yeah.
So it's before all of that. The nuclear deal was on the table. They were also talking about defense guarantees that the United
Hmm.
States would give to Saudi Arabia. The Biden administration was negotiating a very tasty looking package for the Saudis. And but the condition was agreeing to joining the Abraham Accords and normalizing with Israel. And it looked like there was a decent chance that that was going to move ahead. And then, of course, October 7th happened. These two things are probably not entirely disconnected, right?
Mm,
Because there was tremendous concern among Palestinians, including Hamas, that, I mean, basically, the leverage that the Palestinian people have had, the main leverage that they have had vis a vis Israel
uh,
is, if you agree to a Palestinian state, according to the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, which was under the auspices of the Saudis,
that's
the,
right.
the grand prize in exchange is normalization with the entire Arab world, with Saudi Arabia being the crown jewel of all of that.
That's right.
And so the fear was, Israel was going to get the prize without having to make any serious concessions vis-a-vis the Palestinian file toward a Palestinian state, right? Um, and so that was key under the Biden administration. Then you have this announcement that the Trump administration has made this deal with the Saudis. They've sold the farm, right? They've given the Saudis this nuclear deal that they have been seeking for decades and decades, and they've sold Israel out, right?
Oh,
Donald
and there
Trump,
is
his
no
great friend Israel,
enrichment.
has given the Saudis this major prize while, doing nothing on the Abraham Accords. And, unlike what the Biden administration was doing. So he gets a ton of flack, including from Republicans saying, "What are you doing?" And so what does he do? He's like, "Oh, I'm getting criticized. No problem. I'll put out a post on social media and say, well, of course the Saudis have to agree to the Abraham Accords." And of course, we all
Listen,
know,
this is not gonna improve the Saudi American relations.
okay, now you tell me what you think. My guess, I want to hear what you think. My guess is MBS and his people are sitting in Riyadh, see this tweet on Truth Social and say, well, fuck. But of course, this is Donald Trump. This is what he does. Let's wait a week or 2 weeks or a month and he'll forget about it. And I think they're right. I think that's what will happen.
I mean, on one hand, you are correct. On another hand, it is not these Gulf states, when they pay, they expect loyalty. When they think that you are on their side, especially if it's a transactional relationship, right?
Yeah. Sure.
When that transaction is there, there's certain expectation. I don't know if you remember Trump in Florida met with a group of Saudi investors, and in front of them all, he said, "I make the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman kiss my ass." Several times in front of a room full of Saudi and fucking investors. And the next day, the Crown Prince basically makes an agreement with Zelensky to have a facility to build drones
Sure.
to intercept the Shahed drones, one, and to train the Saudis on how to use it.
Yeah.
Trump sent Rubio right away to tell MBS he's disappointed with the fact that the Crown Prince signed an agreement with Zelensky without consulting with Donald Trump.
Hmm.
The Crown Prince told him, "We have an agreement with you to protect us, and you couldn't, so we went elsewhere."
Yeah.
Like, the Crown Prince could have easily, like, and, I'm not a fan of the Crown Prince, but he could have easily acted as a child, right? And, like, said, get back to where the fuck you come from or whatever. But he dealt with it prestige. You know, these people when they end a relationship with you, they don't, especially when they deal with someone stronger than them, they don't slam the door in your face. They walk away very slowly without noticing that the door got shut down on you. The Saudis are already looking elsewhere for their own security. They're already looking elsewhere for their investments. They're already looking elsewhere for their economy. This one-on-one relationship between the Saudis and the Americans, in my own opinion, is the start of the death of the American petrodollar. The fact is, the last 4, 5, 6, I don't remember, I lost count of the G7 meetings. Crown Prince missed them all, and he
Mm.
visited the BRICS. He went to every single BRICS meeting. What does that tell you? That his priorities are shifting from countries that are limiting their abilities of you need to follow this human right and that human right, and you need to follow this rule and that rule. And they pay so much extra for it. Meanwhile, they're not getting what they are like promised for in their money. So we're just gonna look elsewhere. They have already are I believe that the US Centercom, they already announced they're moving it from Qatar to Israel. That has already been announced. I feel like Qatar is going to invite over Turkey to
Mm.
come and fill the American seat for several reasons. Turkey is a NATO member. Second, they're Sunni Muslims and they're allied. Third, Iran would be less likely to start a war with a neighboring country like Turkey that is also Muslim. That would also establish a Sunni bloc between Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and create this
Egypt.
new, yeah, that would create this Sunni coalition that has been waited on. The Gulf states that thought the United States base would be repelling these attacks from Iran have all of a sudden recognized that, hold on, these bases that are supposed to protect us are now making us a target.
Sure.
Then let's see if we can change this game that we're playing. How can we make ourselves not a target? Because these countries haven't designed themselves to go to war. They're designed for several things and several things only: business, security, safety, for foreign investors to come, for
Yep.
foreign tourists to enjoy. And if you can't create that atmosphere, the whole 40, 50 years that they have spent creating that image all of a sudden has shattered.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 For sure. I mean, the I think that's all right. And what I would add to that, I think the Gulf states are, and I think they have been for a long time, but this is accelerating it. The process of hedging and diversifying their options. But the caveat that I would add to that is, as much as they look for regional groupings, which they're doing, the United States is still irreplaceable. I mean, even, with regional groupings, with, outreach to the Chinese, I mean, maybe the Russians who are a bit preoccupied, but still the United States is an indispensable partner, at least at this point, and
Mhm.
they have to look for ways to keep the United States on side, even as they diversify, because obviously, um, as you've noted, the United States has not kept them safe in this instance. And in fact, having United States American bases in their country, and this extends, for example, to Jordan, has led to blowback and made them less safe, which of course was the opposite of, the way things were supposed to
Intended intended purpose.
be intended.
Um,
Yeah.
are we looking at a permanent escalation in the Middle East with the escalation tensions involving Iran, Hezbollah, Al Houthi? the Saudi government. You have what am I missing? I feel like I'm Jordan. You just mentioned Jordan. There's a lot of
There was even a drone attack on, on
from
Egypt, basically on, right on the Egyptian coast on the Mediterranean, right near the Suez Canal.
Iraq, yes,
Iraq.
and Iraq as well.
Yeah.
There, are we looking at the permanent expansion, or is this still containable?
I mean, look, I wouldn't say it's permanent, but what I would say is we're in a really bad situation where the situation is spreading and it's escalating and there's no obvious way out. And the Trump administration clearly has no idea what it's doing on the one hand. I mean, I don't know if you, there was an extraordinary, I think it was from her, the podcast that she did with Ezra Klein, Maggie Haberman, who co-wrote with Jonathan Swan the book that the sort of bombshell book that just came out on Trump's second term. Uh, there's a quote from her saying that Donald Trump spends 70% of his time and mental energy thinking about White House renovations.
Oh my god! Oh my
That's
god!
that's what our president is doing. Meanwhile, we are in an escalating situation in the Middle East that he thought was going to be chick chock. It was going to take 3 to 4 weeks. It was going to lead to regime change. It was all going to be very easy. It was going to be like Venezuela. He has no idea what he's doing. We have the least competent Secretary of Defense. Oh, sorry, I mean Secretary of War that we've ever had in Pete Hegseth, who's busy spending his time thinking about testosterone testing for troops and lethality maxing, all of this, craziness. There is no strategy for a way out. And uh, meanwhile, we have a situation where we have a more hardline regime in Tehran, and they have no reason to trust an agreement with this administration, especially after, the ostensible reason for this war against Iran was to prevent Iran from being able to enrich and from ever getting a nuclear weapon. And then Trump turns around and makes an agreement with the Saudis where they would be able to enrich on their own soil and basically have a pathway to developing a nuclear
Hmm.
weapon. So, at this point, the regime in Tehran is like, why would we ever trust you? First of all, you ripped up the JCPOA. I mean, we can't trust anything. Why would
There's we can list a billion things. At
right?
this.
And meanwhile, Trump is literally, according to his, basically his biographer, spending 70% of his time thinking about gilding the White House and remaking Washington, D.C. in his image. Uh, you know, so yeah, we're in a
I wish like his image is even good. Never mind. The like he listen. I started calling Trump Baba Trump, like because in our countries we call the Saudi king, Baba Salman. Before him, we called Baba Abdullah, Baba Azuz, and
mm,
same thing in the UAE. Anytime you have a strong man, you cutify them,
mm,
so they treat you a little bit nicer. I'm not the U.S. citizen yet, so I call him Baba Trump. Meanwhile, we have Patricia Hegseth and Maria Rubio, and we have the whole rest of the team, Miss Lindsey Graham. They all were somehow like all about escalating, making the situation somehow like America needs to hit. They used some of more strategic bombs on the least strategic targets, and they have wasted our anti-defense missiles. We only have 200 CAD missile left, 1,200 Patriot missiles left, and like the pack missiles are like what 400 or 500 left. And I don't know what is the today number. That was like 4 or 5 days ago. And so I'm looking at this and I'm trying to understand how is these Middle Eastern policy decisions happening behind closed door, Professor. You've been in the lobbies in DC. Do you have a thing or two that you know about how these decisions are made? What am I missing here?
I don't I mean, I we're dealing with an administration that
Are you trying to go out now? Come. Hey, give me 1 second. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Come here, baby.
Hi, everybody. It
I'll
sounds
just.
like we're waiting for a pet, if I could. We
Yeah, he
yeah,
was trying to leave the room,
I see. Got it.
and I'm
You
just
know,
gonna leave the door open for him.
dealing with an administration that, I mean, it's hard to come up with any parallel, in terms of the absence of strategic thinking. A key piece of this is that you have a president who, at least in his first term, there were some serious people who would, um, who would say this is a mistake, who would act as adults in the room and who would constrain and who had experience in strategic thinking. And in Trump 2.0, all of those people are gone and they've been replaced by yes men. And I mean, there is again, this was a situation, and we know this from reporting, in the New York Times, in terms of the discussions that went on within the Trump administration after Benjamin Netanyahu made his presentation in the Situation Room. There were those in the room who had some degree of skepticism. The biggest skeptic in the room was J.D. Vance. But ultimately, even Vance said, look, Mr. President, if this is what you want to do, then, we'll support it and we'll go out and we'll sell it to the American people. You're dealing with a president who, knows nothing about this stuff and went based on his gut, listening to a presentation by Benjamin Netanyahu that sounded good. And, so this is not a typical situation. I think if you compare, at least in terms of what we know about Trump administration decision making in Trump 2.0 to, the deliberations that prior American governments have made around, you know, war. I mean, if you go back to deliberations within, the Kennedy administration or, George W. I mean, as problematic as that, well, obviously the Iraq war was a complete disaster, but the extent to which, the Trump administration has gone into this without, I mean, there was a very grandiose plan A for how things were going to work, right? There was going to be regime change. They're going to immediately destroy all the ballistic missiles. The nuclear program was going to be gone. They were going to install Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, for God's sake, right?
Mhm.
Just grandiose plans. And when plan A didn't work, there's no plan B. And that's why we're screwed.
And you are absolutely correct. I feel like every person that actually is an expert in the region was set aside. We have hundreds of the 150 or yeah, at least 100 diplomat missing from being appointed ambassadors and stuff to countries because Trump would rather do him as a diplomat than anyone else.
But the other thing that I would add to that, would you, I mean, of course you're right, but the other thing that I would add to that is that we're dealing with a government in Washington that abhors expertise
Hmm.
and that, has no respect for people who have spent careers working in the federal government, honing their expertise. And it's with regard to foreign policy, absolutely. The dismantling of USAID at the hands of Elon Musk, who also got rid of, you know, many staffers within the State Department. But it's not limited to foreign policy, obviously, right? I mean, this is, largely across the board. You look at, the Department of Health and Human Services and the fact that, we are dealing with measles outbreaks and,
Oh my god.
viruses and from lettuce and everything else, and it's at least in significant part because of this feeling that, you know people who have spent their careers, who have expertise, who are public servants, who have worked for the American people, are worthless and they deserve to be traumatized and to lose their jobs. And we're seeing the impact of that, vis a vis war in the Middle East and foreign policy, but we're seeing it in so many other spheres of life here in the United States as well. It's incredibly problematic.
You see, I think what a lot of people like, I would add to your point here. Trump, in order to do all of that, has started to privatize the government into his own Trump government, private Trump government. Like, when you purposely do not appoint government appointees that are supposed to represent you, and instead you send corporate representatives that represent your personal interest abroad, then you've really started to privatize what governmental services are supposed to do for your own personal interest. And it's just, I have never seen that done before. I genuinely haven't seen that done before in that matter. Like
Sure.
someone transforming because these governmental services exist, right? On one hand, but then he's making this thing that exists on the same side, but in the parallel to it exactly, but not for the interests of the people, someone who answers only to Trump, someone that would sign an NDNA to Trump, someone that would get sued if they talk to the media. Like his mistrust, I guess, is the level of a dictator. But his way of transforming the U.S. government is just by dismantling its infrastructure, so he can create his own infrastructure. So even if he leaves office, like I don't know, the accountability wouldn't work. I don't know what his strategy is, but it's working. We
I
have
mean,
to admit when someone is look, it's working for someone. It's not working for us, but it's working for him.
I mean, I think that one thing that I would add to that is that the Republican Party has been the party of privatization for for decades. Certainly, we saw this under Ronald Reagan when he tried to privatize um, uh, s- uh, public services, whether it was and deregulate. So it's not like all of this is absolutely new, but it is different. It is certainly different. And there's a difference between, Reagan's philosophy of trying to shrink the size of government. I guess this is Grover Norquist, trying to shrink the size of government till you could strangle it in a bathtub. But trying to shrink government to replace it by privatization, that's one thing. But I think what you're alluding to and what we are in fact seeing is more like this personalization, that this replacement of career public servants, and filling the ranks to the extent that they're filled. I mean, they're not complete, they're greatly reduced to begin with in terms of people who are serving the federal government, but replacing many of those who have been, career public servants whose loyalty is to the Constitution and the American people, with people who are directly loyal to Donald Trump. And so we see the personalization, and tied to the personalization, we also see absolutely unprecedented levels of corruption. And, I think for those of us who, spend time, understanding, studying, non-democratic regimes in other parts of the world, the situation here in the United States is starting to look disturbingly similar, to what we've seen in other parts of the world. And the, question is, um, how and, how quickly, we go about reversing this.
I I know that you have probably like only 6 minutes. I will ask you one last question about section 219, 14, 17 again, or 12, 17 again. Sorry. But I also want to remind our viewers that you had an amazing interview yesterday with Debra Amos and Joey. I don't know how to pronounce his
Just
last name. Perfect conversation about the latest updates from U.S. Saudi deal. I thought it was very educational. Please go to give it a look and share. If you haven't subscribed to Professor Shushan yet, please subscribe to her. And if you haven't become a paid subscriber, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. We do this full time, so you don't have to do it full time. We do this education, so you don't have to rely on the big news media that have their own interpretation and own agendas. We don't have any corporate sponsors. We are only dependent on grassroots people like you who are just interested in learning about the truth and nothing but the truth. So give the professor a follow, give the professor a subscribe, paid subscription. Thank you. Professor, our last question of the day, section 219. What is the latest update? Is it still going to pass? And I guess the other attachment is the Power Resolution Act yesterday failed. Where does that leave us about having any control over the Trump administration when it comes to this war? I guess that's a two-part question.
Sorry, what was the second half of the question?
About the Power Resolution Act yesterday was voted down.
Oh, you're talking about, right, in the Senate.
Two
Right.
different questions. Two different
Two different
questions.
questions.
Sorry.
Right. So, well, let's talk about, take the first one, the NDAA, section 219 in the House, 1217 in the Senate. So the situation in terms of where we stand with that is that the National Defense Authorization Act has passed in the House.
Wow.
Yeah. So it passed in the House. It passed, there was, I think, six House Democrats voted for it. So overwhelmingly, Democrats voted against it, but there were six Democrats who provided key support, that helped it to get over the finish line. I mean, numerically, their support was key to it passing. There were a small number of Republicans who voted against it. So it has passed on the House side, including Section 219. And just to remind folks what Section 219 is, this is the unprecedented U.S. Israeli defense integration between the U.S. and Israel. Um, so it's passed the House. It is, the bill is problematic in many ways, and not just Section 219, which is absolutely problematic. And I've, talked about it a lot in the debrief, but there are many ways in which it's problematic. For example, on the House side, it contains the so-called SAVE Act, right? Which is actually the bill that would, um, have dramatic changes in terms of voter identification that would require birth certificates,
Mm,
et cetera, that a lot of Americans don't have access to, especially married women who have changed their names, whose names are different from what it was. Basically, it's a voter suppression law, and they stuffed it into the NDAA. So that's incredibly problematic. And the top line, what's called, the top line spending for the
Hmm.
is completely insane and out of control. Within the NDAA, it's $1.15 trillion, I believe, which is absolutely crazy. So there are many ways in which the NDAA is very problematic, and Section 219 is one of them. Um,
Okay.
the bill is still pending in the Senate. It has not passed in the Senate. And so there is still, this is, as I'm saying, it's incredibly problematic legislation for a number of different reasons. And if you don't want it to pass, then your avenue is to get in touch with your two senators, unless, of course, you live in Washington, D.C., in which case you're out of luck because you don't have representation. But if you live in one of the 50 states, you can get in touch with your two senators and let them know that you oppose the NDAA. As it certainly would not want the SAVE Act to be part of it. You think the top line is way too high. You oppose $1.15 trillion for the Pentagon. And at minimum, you think that what is Section 1217 on U.S. Israel military integration in the Senate NDAA, at a very minimum, has to have a separate debate and vote, right? Unlike what happened in the House, where there was no, this is very consequential legislation. It was simply folded into the NDAA without any debate, without a separate vote on it. And in fact, there was an amendment by Massey and Khanna, Congressman Massey and Khanna, that would have stripped in the House, it would have stripped Section 219 from the House NDAA, and the Republican Rules Committee refused to entertain it. So basically, they refused any opportunity for a separate debate and a separate vote and just folded it into the NDAA and passed the NDAA. And so I think the message to senators has to be that the same thing can't happen in the Senate. The good news is, right, that the Senate has the filibuster. So whereas in the House, it was a simple, the NDAA could pass by a simple majority, in the Senate, it needs to achieve, it needs to have support from 60 senators. So if Democrats stay united, and Democrats, if it were just an issue of Section 1217, the U.S. Israel piece, they probably wouldn't. But there are other issues. And one of the things, to Democratic senators' credit, and I should mention this as well, um, because of their opposition to the continuation of the Iran war, especially without any authorization from Congress, they used their votes to block the NDAA from proceeding in the Senate previously. So as long as, if Democrats remain united on that, um, and, even better if they can peel off some Republican support. But even, I mean, Republicans cannot move ahead with the NDAA in the Senate numerically without peeling off some Democrats. And so it's absolutely essential that Senator Chuck Schumer keep all Democrats in the Senate on side. And there is, so in that way, there's still a possibility that the NDAA won't move forward, or at least won't move forward as it currently is. And there would have to be significant changes.
Do you, I know we're 3 minutes over time. Do you have any message, any last words? Do you have any announcements you'd like to say before we sign off?
I'll just say it is wonderful to get to be with you and chat with you again, Wajeeh. This is a lot of fun. It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for sharing your platform with me. It's great to get to know your wonderful audience and fans who support you. Folks, if you want to check out the debrief, which is my Substack, I absolutely love for you to do that. Celebrating 1 year since I launched the debrief, and I do happen to have a sale that is ending today, the last day of July. So if you're interested in becoming a paid subscriber, this is definitely the day to do it. And just thanks for having me, Wajeeh. It's really a pleasure.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. I always love meeting people with great minds, and you are definitely with one of those great minds. Thank you so much. You honor me with your presence. I'll give you my signal or phone number so we can talk about the Substack and also other ideas for interviews and where you want to go from here. Always happy to collaborate.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wajeeh. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you so much. As everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I love your faces, and as always, remember, you may not fuck with politics, but politics will always fuck with you. مع السلامة, bye bye, وبالإنجليزي. Goodbye. I'll see
مع
you tomorrow.
السلامة. إلى اللقاء.
مع السلامة. How you say goodbye in Hebrew?
Goodbye. Shalom. Lehitraot is see you later.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that, but I'll have to learn it later.
Lehitraot, or, it's Friday, so you can just say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Hello. I love it. Have a good one.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.